Welcome to Trending in Education. Mike Palmer here. I'm joined today by Kumar Garg, who is the president of Renaissance Philanthropy. It's been about 3.5 years since Kumar was on Trending in Ed. Welcome back to the podcast.
Great to be back. Lots happened. Yeah. It's good. Fun to
Plenty.
be
I
on.
mean,
I wanna keep earning these visits so I can get my magnet.
that's right. Your next appearance, you'll get that refrigerator magnet. So consider that a done deal. But maybe catch folks up. We'll include a link to your previous appearance at the time when you were on earlier. You were managing director at Schmidt Futures, which was really interesting conversation, but you have now evolved into a new and exciting role here with Renaissance Philanthropy. Maybe you can catch folks up on what you've been up to, what that is.
Yeah, of course. Well, I would say the past 3.5 years have been quite eventful in the world of technology. When we last chatted, we had just started working with Eric on a program that sat at the intersection of AI and learning science. And, at the time when I started that work, it was really informed by my time working in the Obama White House, where I
Right.
did a lot of work on education R&D. And one of my sort of real views was that the idea of education R&D was just not taken seriously enough as an area of R&D. You know,
hmm
the government makes huge investments in health research and space research and
hmm
biomedical research and
Maybe a little
defense.
defense, perhaps. Yeah.
Yeah. But that education research was kind of considered, for a while, it wasn't even included in our budget summaries on research funding. So I'd always thought, this is a pretty important part if we're going to get more learning innovation, more learning outcomes, deliver for
Yeah.
more kids.
I feel like I learned a little CEO math from you on this, where you were saying, like, if we just spend 1% of what we spend on defense or whatever, like these small incremental shifts of big expenditures could really move the needle in terms of genuine innovation in
Yeah.
education and technology.
Yeah, there was a recent report by the Alliance for Learning Innovation Ally that estimated basically 2% of all federal education spending is on R&D or
Mm,
less.
mm,
So really small share
yeah.
on how do we figure out what our children are learning, how to make it better, everything that would sort of fit into research and development.
Mhm.
So that was like the general sort of, and part of what I was interested in was, well, there's been this big move as computer science and especially AI is transforming a number of different scientific fields. So
Right.
if you're a biomedical researcher today, you're actually quite excited about things like
Right.
AlphaFold,
hmm
which are allowing us to be able to figure out protein folding, which used to be
hmm
considered a very hard problem. And
Right.
now, because of AlphaFold, hundreds of millions of different protein folds have been identified. The question was, how can those big improvements that are happening in other sciences be brought to the learning sciences? And what would that take? So that was work that we started then. At the time, it was considered a very niche idea, but like I think the world has in the past couple years really woken up
Right.
to the AI thesis.
Right.
As
Because you were on this back in the teens in the Obama
pre ChatGPT.
administration. Yes,
Yeah,
exactly. And STEM included AI. Folks were talking about it, but this was the whole AI winter, which has clearly thawed out now. And folks are, if anything, AI is running hot. And, we do talk about the hype cycle where I feel like folks are maybe starting to question in the other direction just because it's been running so hot really since November of 22, right?
yes. So I think at this point, it's been in the zeitgeist for multiple years.
Yeah.
And so people are certainly interested in it. I think the interesting thing for me has been that one, the technical community was excited about it before it became, because they started to see suddenly things that used to
Yeah.
be hard start to get a lot easier.
A lot of Nobel Prize winners are
Yeah.
winning by applying AI, like physics and chemistry. You mentioned protein folding, but a lot of it is really leveraging these new tools across scientific domains is where the cutting edge is. But where is that for learning?
Yeah. And, the most recent set of Nobel winners had multiple AI examples in there. So that's an area I've been sort of fascinated by. What is the intersection between AI and learning science? And the interesting thing is just that this is still a relatively small field, despite the substantial amount of interest that has grown up. And the reason it's a small field is that to actually work at the intersection of education and AI and learning science and AI, you actually have to have cross domain expertise. You actually need to be able to keep up with how these foundational models are improving.
Mhm.
and you need to be able to keep up with what's the best learning science? What do we
Right.
actually know about deploying tools in the classroom?
You got to be
We
like
think
a,
that
a 5 tool player in baseball. You got to be able to run, hit for power, hit for average, play defense, and have a good arm. 5 tool. You got to be able to do it all.
right. And the thing is that it's actually just really hard to be on the cutting edge of multiple things. So what that ends up meaning is that you'll certainly have folks who are trying to apply AI in education, but the number of people who actually are able to drive it. So one of the things that we did was we created a program called the Learning Engineering Virtual Institute. And the point of that program was to actually say, we want to build these bilingual teams, teams that are at the technical edge on AI, but also have part of the team that is like actually deployed into classrooms and learning environments. Bring those teams together, and then we want to focus them on really hard but important goals. So in the Levy
Mhm.
example, the goal was, can we double the rate of middle school math progress? There's a set of studies that came out in the early 2010s that actually showed that high dosage, high quality tutoring could
Right.
actually take low income students and double their rate of math progress.
Right. Right.
Problem was the cost of that intervention was around $4,000 per kid.
Mhm.
And so it was hard to scale even in an environment where funding might be available. So the question was, can we replicate that result in a lot more settings and can we bring the price down?
Right.
And so we selected 7 teams into that program, and now teams are multiple years in and showing really strong progress.
Mhm.
So part of the goal for Renaissance, which is a new organization I launched 6 months ago, is to sort of do that work, which is to identify these sort of moonshot goals
Mhm.
and say, what is it going to take to sort of set that goal and to then work with scientists and technologists and innovators on the cutting edge to then go after that goal. And then
Mhm.
how can we, by setting that goal, also draw in funders and philanthropic capital? How can we draw in government and others? And then
Mhm.
surge some of that effort? Because I think once you can actually set these precise goals, it's very powerful. And
Mhm.
so, just earlier this week, we actually announced a partnership with the Walton Family Foundation.
Yes, I have
They
that right here on my phone as we speak. Yes.
Yeah. And so part of the goal was, how can we actually go through this process of identifying what these bold bets look like,
Right.
where we've identified what is the future world we actually want? It's in the technical possible. It's no longer, like, hey,
Yeah.
and what is it going to take to get there? And then say, can we then build programs and efforts to then go after it and solve it in
Mhm.
ways that then actually makes this idea that AI and AI progress can actually be for the benefit for all of us
Right.
much more real. Because I think
Yeah.
otherwise we're just going to be stuck with, a few examples that don't apply in settings that we actually care about, or we're going to end up with examples that don't scale in settings that we care about. And
Right.
education, ultimately, if we're going to realize its potential, has to be done for all students and in a
Mhm.
lot of settings, not just in a few settings.
Yeah.
That's just going to require a lot of kind of hands-on applied work. So that's what
Yeah.
some of this partnership work that we announced is.
Yeah, and congratulations on launching Renaissance within the last 6 months. This new effort is in flight, and to your point, you're starting to share more content. There was also a really interesting post about the pattern languages, philanthropic activity around, I think it was around education and AI. So this is relatively recent. If folks want to stay on top of this stuff, I think you're sharing it on LinkedIn, and also Renaissance is now. If folks are interested in Renaissance, where should they look? Where should they go?
Yeah, we have a website, renaissancephilanthropy.org. And the real idea behind Renaissance, we were actually spent a bunch of time on picking the name. It was actually part of it was we were inspired by the actual Renaissance, where a couple of different things were true. One was, the role of the patron was really important. If you sort of
Mm,
think about the role that patron families played in
yeah.
betting on Da Vinci and
Mhm.
other parts of the Renaissance, and being
Yeah.
able to say, here's a bold new idea you have, and we're just going to give you the resources to go after it.
Mhm.
So we think that donors today could play that role in actually betting on cutting edge new ideas. The second is the Renaissance was really a flourishing. It was
Right.
actually the
Right.
intersection between science, technology, and art and human creativity and
Mm,
human potential. So how do we think expansively about what would it take for us to have a Renaissance today? and
Yeah.
really take these advances in technology to create flourishing for a lot more people. And so what does
Yeah.
that creativity flourishing look like? And the third is just this idea that, people sometimes think narrowly about what certain applications are, but increasingly what we're finding is where things are happening is at the intersection.
Mhm.
Application of AI for education. It's
Right.
using these tools to help farmers detect diseases better. And so I think sometimes when people think too much within one single discipline, they
Yes.
kind of miss. And so we also wanted to say this idea that, you know, we're pretty good as a society when something fits exactly within the box we've created, but
Right.
a lot of ideas kind of sit in between and then
Sure.
they kind of struggle. And so
Right.
what we wanted to say is there's a role that philanthropy can play in actually those things that don't fit.
Mm.
And then we actually want to encourage scientists to write those ideas down. It might not fit within their today lab because
Right.
the idea that actually is much bigger than that, or it's an idea that requires to be implemented in the field. It's an idea that requires partnerships across a number of areas. So part of the reason for the pattern language and these playbooks are now on our website is to say when you're tackling a hard problem, it's actually really useful to think about what are the mental models that allows you to unpack the problem. Is this something where you need to actually shape the market, where it's a market failure because the market is still immature and you actually need to have somebody sort of signal that they would buy something that hasn't even been invented. That
Right.
actually has happened with vaccines where saying if you build a vaccine of this quality has actually caused market participants to invent the vaccine. So is
Yeah.
this a market shaping problem? Is this a problem where policymakers are unaware of this opportunity and technical experts can have an impact on that opportunity?
Yeah.
And we find that really interesting to just sort of like give people mental models for how to sort of unpack and for different problems are different things, but you can design much more interesting partnerships than just saying, here's a thing and more people should have it. Because, then
Right.
you don't know what the blockers are that
Right.
can
Right.
help you unlock that scale.
Yeah. I mentioned you earlier, the winner of our March Madness 2024, shout out to my wife, Dr. Robin Naughton, was mental models, which, what's interesting about it is it's relevant in computer science and AI, but it's also relevant in a very humanistic framework too, where humans are sense makers and we need to figure out what framework, what lens do we need to apply to things. And frequently the experts that you're talking about, the real cutting edge of science and innovation and invention, may not be as well versed with macroeconomics or systemic factors that would really benefit from the insight of philanthropy or other folks of experience in government and operating at scale. So, appreciate the conceptual model that you're talking about. And then for our listeners who may want something a little more concrete and hands on, I think we did want to dig a little bit into the work that you did with the Walton Family Foundation around a request for information, I guess is what it was, to ask folks, how are you thinking about the needs that exist within education and where technology and AI might be able to transform things. Can you frame that up in a little more detail? We'll share the report in the show notes if folks want to follow along, but I thought some of the insights and some of the framing there, the mental models that you're putting into play, I think they help. One of the things I've talked about on the show a lot is that with the advent of AI, one of the major things that humans are going to have to continue to get good at is problem formulation. What are the challenges and then how do you apply the emerging technology to those problems? I was very happy to see that kind of reflected in your work here, but can you shape up for folks what we're talking about in the report that was just released?
Happy to do it. Yeah. So on Tuesday, as part of this new partnership that we announced with Walton Family Foundation, we actually released the results, the kind of early assessment from this RFI that we did over the summer.
Hmm.
And part of the point of the RFI was, as I said, as part of our Learning and Engineering Virtual Institute, we went after this middle school math goal. We want to do more of those kind of big bets. And so we wanted to go out to the field and say, what's in the possible? What's a hard problem in education that now seems possible for us to technically go after? And what could that be?
Hmm.
Obviously, we're going to do some of that work ourselves to figure out, but we also wanted to open it up because
Yeah.
you know, one of our views is that people too often don't think of these as network problems where there's deep expertise that actually sits within the scientific community. And how do you sort of open a wide call? So that was kind of the point of the RFI.
Sure.
And one of the things that we sort of released on Tuesday was just some of the early ideas and some of the big themes that we sort of saw.
Hmm.
Part of the reason that we wanted to sort of put that out there is maybe, if folks go to the website and they read it, they might be like, there's something missing.
Right.
I've got an idea.
Hmm.
Folks are welcome to send more ideas in. We've got
Yeah.
email address on the website and that kind of thing. But then also there might be things that are on there that trigger for them thinking and work that they might want to sort of complement in so
Right.
that they're sort of bringing people along on this story. So
This is kind of early stage, like seeding ideas, right? Like maybe it's a little closer to implementation, but it's also like a big enough bet that there should be some timeline applied to these investments. Because the flip side, I think, is more there are immediate implementations where folks are using an LLM at a district level and seeing what happens. That's not really what you're talking about here.
yeah, I mean, I think we certainly want some of that input if folks are implementing and finding that there are deep gaps. But
Mhm.
really, what we're talking about are what are big opportunities to solve a hard problem. So, like, for example, you know, can we get a lot better at being able to help students in their writing, right?
Mhm.
Most students, when you get to the high school level, at a national level, when they do national writing assessments, are not at, you know, competency on writing. This is a huge blocker if they want to pursue college or join the workforce, because as many people know, like writing is actually a huge gradient by which we're evaluated. The problem with writing is that the way you get better at writing is to do more of it and to get high quality feedback.
Mhm.
That is very time intensive to get high quality feedback on each revision.
Right.
And teachers struggle with it. Writing instructors, everyone struggled with how do you get enough reps?
Right.
One of the ideas that we sort of got through this process is you don't take the writing instructor out of the loop. It's just that there's a bunch of iterative revisions that you can actually through automated support where you've actually trained these models to give you high quality. Have you thought about this? Or how would you
Yep.
structure this? And you're getting a bunch of reps. That can have a pretty decent impact on your ability to improve in writing. And then the writing instructor comes in and sees a bunch of those drafts and then gives you additional feedback on top of it.
Yeah.
That solves a problem where we're not going to 10x the number of writing instructors in this country.
Right.
It's a really powerful way to improve on something that will matter, future ability to have success. And then the question that we have on the solving a problem is, okay, what is the net set of steps that we have between where the technology is today to a world-class writing support tool? And is it that we need to build a really large benchmark data set of essays that are coded to their quality? Is it that we need to test a bunch of these tools in classrooms in a particular area? So there's a bunch of next steps questions, but we want to sort of first identify what's the big if true. Imagine if we
Hmm.
provide a world-class writing support tool.
Yeah.
One, how far away is that technically? And two, would it be a big deal if it existed? And so
Right.
we've been trying to collect those because certainly some of those could then become programs we run where we then go out to philanthropic donors and have them support it. But some of those could be ideas that then government gets championed. Some of those could be ideas that then the private sector just says, oh, that's a pretty good use case. I think we're pretty close. Maybe we should just build it. So this idea that tightly formulating these problems and solutions, for some subset of listeners, this will feel very obvious. To go back to our earlier part of the conversation, most people are not bilingual between these two domains. You know, some people will understand here's where the LLMs are, here's where rapid progress is happening on foundational models. And some
Right.
people are very aware of what are deep systemic challenges in education.
Hmm.
Those places, those 2 ideas overlap, but they don't
Right.
overlap all things. There are
Hmm.
lots of problems in education that these technical improvements are not gonna solve. It's
Right.
identifying those things where, you actually can make serious progress. That's the magic of it. You wanna at least start to find those areas because we think that can be catalytic for industry, for
Hmm.
philanthropy, and for government.
Yeah. And you're in some ways designing the cogs that you can kind of snap into where you have the pattern language where you could say, okay, now this type of problem with this application of AI or AR, emerging technology, can then be implemented if we can apply this pattern. It is the end of year. Kumar, this is going to be going out in December. People like to look ahead to next year. There is a little bit of, seeing the future that comes from these types of, requests for information and listening tours. You're 6 months in. We're able to get a little bit of your fresh thinking. What's some top lines? Like, what are some things you're noticing? Any trends or anything in the future in the world of ed tech and AI that's kind of bubbling up?
Couple of general points I'll make. One is that I think AI remains in a scaling phase where I think each year we keep finding that the technical improvements at the quarterly mark continue to happen. There's a small debate that always keeps happening as to whether the progress will slow down,
Right.
progress will speed up, but continues to happen. So I think that's
Hmm.
one.
Hmm.
Two is there's a huge amount of interest in this area. I think there was a recent survey that Walton actually supported that showed that there's interest off the charts among students, parents, teachers in these technologies and education. So education is rather than being recoiling at it, is an early
Yeah.
adopter, and there's lots of pent up interest. I'm
Hmm.
sure you can find this.
Yeah.
I think three is that we still need to do a lot of work to have game changing solutions that, we're getting some early notes of progress, but we don't have some canonical win where everyone can kind of look at it. So I think that was number three. And then number four, I would say that if you actually think about, and this came through in our RFI responses, is that there are a few clusters. There's a lot of interest in the intersection between AI and tutoring
Hmm.
because people know there's a lot of research that tutoring, one to one instruction has a real powerful effect. Are there ways the human tutors and teachers can pair
Yeah.
with the power of a digital tutor in ways that allows a lot more personalization and capability?
Hmm.
Is there a way teachers can become even more productive and get a bunch of their administrative tasks off
Yep.
their list so they can
Hmm.
focus more on teaching? Generative AI is really good at creating imaginary worlds, is really good at, generating. Are there ways that that can create a lot more of an immersive STEM learning experience? Can we build learning experiences that are as addictive as the most addictive video game?
Yeah.
Now you're doing it on learning. That used to be like a talking point, used to just be incredibly expensive to
Mm.
build those high fidelity environments. Can you do it? Are there ways that we can build just much better ways to detect when students are struggling?
Right.
Often we don't know that a student is falling behind or that a student might have early stages of dyslexia or other things that are holding back their learning.
Yeah.
Interventions come too late. Can our ability to detect that get way better? Assessment is another big one, which
Right.
is, ultimately AI systems are prediction engines. What is assessment? Assessment is just I give you some test items and I'm predicting your future ability to do
Yeah.
the work, right?
I need to double check our last conversation because I recall us talking about stealth assessments and we may have even referenced Duolingo, but it does feel like as we get better at the analysis side, it can be almost like a passive uptake rather than requiring the formal structure of an assessment session, like a testing session. And instead, you can just, through behavioral cues, the other behavior that folks are tracking a lot is attendance, right? And the attendance problems that we're facing, like what
Yeah.
kind of interventions can actually drive that. Unfortunately, the all ear scandal was a bit of a black eye early in the advent of this stuff, but we're still very early stages. The other thing I have heard is that we're now in an engineering phase as opposed to a more abstract scientific exploration phase. A lot of the breakthroughs have happened and now the question is, how do you apply these breakthrough technologies to actual problems? Thoughts on that? People talk about inflection points or paradigm shifts, but it does feel like something significant has happened. And then when you look at a more strategic horizon, look 5, 10 years out, this is where the moonshot thinking I think is important right now, where, even if there is backlash in the short term or folks are maybe skeptical because their AI gave them, bad travel recommendations on Expedia. Like this wave is ultimately going to be moving towards this technology maturing to the point that it makes meaningful impact. What do you say to folks who are skeptical about it? Folks who are maybe questioning how much surveillance is needed to kind of get to these places. What are some of the bigger critiques that you struggle with when it comes to this space?
The hard part to know, but I think important to keep in mind is that this is not a moment in time. These are technologies that are currently going through a rapid improvement phase. If you went back to GPT-1,
Mhm.
which is just like 5 years ago, it couldn't do very much. But like
Yeah.
even then, the fact that it was what was called like a system that was a general learning system,
Mm,
or that most of the AI systems were specifically trained to do a thing. I'm
yes.
training you on chess. I'm training you on a thing. GPT Fun was one of the early systems that was just generally trained.
Mm,
You would throw problems at it. Lots of people, when it came out, said, "Oh, it gets all these things wrong."
right.
But the machine learning people said, "But it's general. It wasn't trained on anything. The fact that it gets anything right, kind of amazing." And
Right.
then GPT-2 came out, and all they had done was put in more data and put in more compute, and then it got a lot better.
Yeah. Because
And
those
then people
training
said,
cycles, right? Like we're dealing with orders of magnitude. Yeah.
each iteration, there are things that people say it can't do, and then
Mm,
suddenly it can do them
yeah.
as you increase the data and the compute. We don't know. At some point, this might hit a wall.
Yeah.
These systems stop getting better, and then we just have to figure out what's the best use case.
Right.
There's also a world in which they keep getting better. And so things
Right.
that used to be barriers are no longer barriers. And so the reason I think the education sector needs to take it seriously and we need to build these bridges is that if these scaling laws hold, we don't want just the technology to happen to us. We want it to actually help us learn. We want it to
Right.
be a co-learning process where
Hmm.
this can actually increase human productivity. It can actually make us faster and better. It can help our learners. So I both think it is very true what we should not do, and some of the mistakes that you pointed out, where people jump in and they say, here's my tool and I'm going to just throw it at kids. That leads to a lot of false promises and a lot of
Mm,
mistakes.
hmm.
We have to keep that idea that these are early technologies. Some of them are not ready for prime time. And this idea that if we are not building the test beds to try these ideas out,
Yeah.
as these things get better, education is going to be in the back of the line. It's going to miss
Right.
out on these capabilities. And so we need to
Mm,
build up that talent sector that sits in between. We need to build the test beds. We need to come up with these bold use cases. We'll be way better as a sector
hmm.
be able to put these to use. So I don't think this is a like, is this good? Is this bad? I think is, are we in the game or are we not in the game? Are we making the bets to learn along the way? And
Hmm.
then if the core technology keeps getting better, does education get those benefits sooner than later?
Yeah. Well, it's also made me think about the problem of trust in our educational institutions and trust in educational technology, both of which I think are perhaps suspect. And then also, if you think about it from an equity lens, trust that the technology is actually going to help me versus it's going to catch me doing wrong. We are recording this in November of 2024. There just was a presidential election where I think the sentiment broadly out there is roiling, perhaps. Folks are not necessarily satisfied. There's a lot of polarization. School boards notoriously have been the front lines of some of the polarization that's out there. And then into that lens, you want to release evidence-based, randomized controlled trials, advancing science. But even the feelings towards science as, an institution is probably more in question than it has been, at least in my lifetime. How are you thinking about that stuff? This is where we're getting a little more into the headier part of the conversation, but it does feel like, from a tactical perspective, I think a lot of what you're outlining makes a lot of sense. But the humans who you're serving, I think, are going through some real upheaval. So how do you think those things intersect?
I mean, it's a great question. I don't think we fully know. And by that, what I mean is that there is a big question around having people do things to us or having people feel the world around them, the technology around them, the institutions around them are trying to empower them,
Mhm.
still keeping them in the driver's seat. I
Yeah.
think like one of the lessons from COVID is people were quite frustrated by the idea of trust us.
Yeah.
A lot of people said, I don't know, like, I think we should reopen this school, you
Yeah.
know?
Right.
And I think that's what'll actually help my kids learn. So I think
Mm,
that's just a lot of, you have to actually feel like the technology is empowering you
mm,
rather than not. And
mhm,
so I think that is really on us, on our end too, which is that as we're building these technologies, who are we putting in the driver's seat?
mhm,
Are we thinking about how we're putting parents much more in the driver's seat,
mhm,
learners in the driver's seat?
mhm.
Are we giving tools to teachers so they can actually do more with learners and with parents? So I
Right.
think some of these are design questions, but some of these are also questions around we don't really know whether these technologies will be empowering, but it's going to make a big difference if they are. I think part
Yeah.
of the reason why these large language models took off as a use case is that they were things that were hyper personal and
Yep.
ones people felt, they could be much more in control of. I think it is a big question as these technologies mature, whether they will have that. One of the things I've been asking folks is that, as far as I can tell, there is no really high quality LLM authoring tool that's student oriented.
Mhm.
We don't want students to just be consumers of these technologies. We want to
Right.
be creators, for lots of like, I think, logistical and, it's harder to build technologies that are student facing. But, I think that made a big impact on the internet when students
Right.
actually build their own
Yep.
apps and feel
Mhm.
that. And so what's that way that we make sure that the authoring capabilities of these technologies
Yeah.
also comes down to the student? So I don't think there's one right answer, but
Yeah.
some of it is going to be, similar to when we talked about computer science for all, when I worked on President Obama, this idea that this is just too important for you to be not aware of how it works. But some of that is just actually like putting you in the driver's seat. And these technologies, they naturally want to help put you in the driver's seat. That's actually one of their core capabilities.
Right.
And so I think we just have to like lean into that, whether
Mhm.
it's individualized tutoring or supports and others to say, if these work well, what they're doing is helping us thrive and do more of what we want to do.
Mhm.
And over time, they can help us build more of that trust versus, you know, this idea that it's all a black box,
Right.
and just trust us that it works.
Right.
So I think transparency is useful. I think there's a role for government, for philanthropy, for education leaders to say, you can look under, here's the training data,
Right.
That's how
Right.
we're making sure. I mean, you raise this question of equity and access, but like part of how we're going to make sure these models and algorithms are equitable is to make sure that the training data
Exactly.
is
Right.
represented. And that's
Right.
something that you should be able to actually look at.
Right.
And
Stem cell research has been limited primarily to white subjects so that the application of a lot of that research has been limited, and analogizing that to these large language models, like how are you capturing a truly representative sample so that the new algorithms are actually powered by a more inclusive representation? That's also a real problem. And to me, everything starts to come back to, you mentioned Renaissance, a more humanistic lens, almost like a behavioral economics lens, psychology lens. How do you get people engaging with this stuff to lean in because they believe in it, they trust it, and it's in their self interest to do so? And then how do you give them enough positive return on that leap of faith, on that first trust in a system to ultimately give them compounding returns that you want them to get? Some heavy stuff. I'm talking to Kumar Garg here. He's the president of Renaissance Philanthropy. It's also renphil.org for those of you who don't like typing a lot of letters. We're bringing it home here, Kumar. It's been amazing having you on. Any concluding thoughts here as we wrap up our conversation?
no, it's been great to be on. I think my only, call out to the community would just be that we're eager to engage. We would love your ideas and we would love feedback as well. I would love for folks to check out the playbooks and what else would they have on there, or what things they would love to see. I would love people's ideas of what should be these bold bets and what are they seeing that they're excited about? Because part of our sort of view is that we want to build a community of folks who want to be ambitious about these technologies, but also want to help ground them in the work. And so, yeah, it's great to be on and would love to make sure that folks can lean in.
Amazing stuff. To quote Barton Fig, we're going to hear from this guy, and I don't mean a postcard. Kumar Garg, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you.
And for our listeners, hopefully you enjoy what you're hearing. If you do, please subscribe. I'll include reference links to everything we talked about on the show. This is Trending in Education. Like us, subscribe, tell your friends, do all the good things. We'll be back again soon.